Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at Food Literacy for All. We're very excited to have Dr. Asmeret Asefaw Berhe joining us. Her talk tonight is titled The Foundation of Food, the Science and Politics of Our Changing Soils. And we want to thank the organizations and groups that make food literacy for all possible. So, of course, the Sustainable Food Systems Initiative, organizations like Growing Hope, Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, Detroit Food Policy Council, Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, Program in the Environment, and the School for Environment and Sustainability at University of Michigan.
Hi everyone, my name is Julius Buzzard. I'm the community co-instructor here at Food Literacy for All. Thank you again for joining us tonight. As Taylor mentioned, we have a large and dynamic team that puts on this course. That's both for students and for the public. So whether you're a student or from the public, welcome. Thank you for being here. Tonight you'll see a little bit from myself and Amanda Edmonds, the faculty co-instructor. You already met Taylor, Jolene. And then there's a whole host of other folks that are supporting in the background, making this happen here tonight and every week. Whether you're here new tonight, this is your first time, or you've been with us all along, there's lots of ways for you to engage, so please do use those. If you want to talk with other folks in the course, please feel free to use the chat. It's a great way to interact with the content in real time and to talk and meet other people who are either students or care about this work. If you have questions, specific questions you want to ask directly to the speaker this evening, you can put those in the Q&A. That should show up separate from the chat in your bottom toolbar. You may need to press the More button to do that. But those Q&A questions we'll get to at the end and make sure that we ask as many of those as we can. And then if you would like to use a live transcript, you can turn that on. It's turned on for everybody, and you'll be able to read along with what's being said.
So every week we have a question of the week, and this is our way to sort of engage students and community members together in sort of one polling platform. And we use the Zoom polling feature. And we're curious, we know all the students had some required readings this week. For some of you, you've already been tapped into soil science for a while now, and for others, this is brand new. So let's gauge where everybody's at here with this question of the week. I'm going to run it in Zoom. So we ask students and community members to engage in Zoom. Which statement best reflects your current perspective on soil and climate solutions? We'll give folks about a minute to answer, and then we'll go over those answers together. This is always the part where I wish we had Jeopardy music playing. So I'll just share back some initial results. 22% of folks are saying they study or work on climate, agricultural, or environmental issues. 11% work directly with soil. 22% know soil can store carbon, but want to understand how. And 26% care about climate solutions, but haven't thought much about soil. We have nobody who's skeptical, so that's great. We can end this poll and share those results back now. And every week, we ask students to submit a 1-minute reflection video, just reflecting on the readings for the week and sort of sharing back how they felt, what they thought, what came up for them. So let's go ahead and run that. We have a student in the School for Environment and Sustainability, Xin Tao. Really loved his sort of critical reflections on the readings.
We got read Amazon paper also, and paper on soil and human security. We often take the dirt beneath our feet for granted, but human agriculture has actually turned natural soil into domesticated soils that can easily recover on their own. Today, global soil erosion outweighs natural soil renewal. Our soil aren't just losing carbon due to the climate warming, like crucial nutrients like the phosphorus are also facing severe depletion. But as political ecology reminds us that we can't fall into the trap of purely tackle fixed solutions. We just threw chemical fertilizers at the problem without fixing the underlying social and economic structures, like unequal resource access or lack of the farmer land rights, will never actually solve land degradation. Ultimately, 21st century solar security isn't just a natural science challenge. We have to combine the scientific research with a real institutional reform to ensure a sustainable future for both humanity and our lands. Thanks for listening.
So before we move into bio, I'll just say as an aspiring political ecologist, I really appreciated him bringing sort of society and questions of power and questioning these technocratic models into that reflection. And here we are with Dr. Asmeret, Asefaw, Berhe. I'm really excited for this talk. I had the chance to sort of watch some of your talks, and the students are really in for a treat tonight. Dr. Asmeret Asefaw Berhe is a professor of soil biogeochemistry and the Velasco Chair in Earth Sciences and Geology at the University of California, Merced. At UC Merced, she directs the Sierra Nevada Research Institute and Climate Institute. She previously served as the director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Science and also as Associate Dean for Graduate Education at UC Merced. These days, her research is focusing on how soils influence Earth's climate, particularly through soil carbon and nutrient cycles, and how they respond to environmental changes like climate change, land use change, erosion, and wildfires. She's known for her leadership in science education, communication, and promoting inclusive excellence in STEM. She is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the American Geophysical Union and the Geological Society of America. She's a wonderful speaker. So on to you, Dr. Berhe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor, and everybody for inviting me to join you in this really exciting program you've got going. I'm excited to share with everybody today about my work in soil, and soil is a passion of mine. FYI, I can't seem to advance the slides. Not sure what happened. Okay, let's see. It still doesn't seem to be working on my side. Was working earlier, but okay, let's see.
So we got
Okay, I think maybe it's working right now. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the why I think soil is the foundation for food, and a little bit about the science of soils and how it's changing, and of course the intersections with policy and politics. In addition to my background in soil science and biogeochemistry, I actually have a master's in political ecology from Michigan State, right there in your neighborhood. So this is a topic that's a huge of interest to me, and I think a fascinating one at that. So I'm excited to share with everybody. But to start with, to tell you a bit about what we do in my lab here at UC Merced, we're the soil biogeochemistry lab, and a lot of our work deals with what we call nanobiogeochemistry. So by the biogeochemical cycling of essential elements like carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus between the soil, plant, and atmosphere systems, in particular focusing on why and how organic matter persists in soil for long periods of time, and the role that that plays in maintenance of the Earth's climate, and a range of issues related to soil health and climate change mitigation. And then we broadly think about a lot of questions related to land degradation, and the role that soil plays and soil health, soil degradation plays, not just in food production, but even in topics like human and national security. As you heard earlier, a lot of the work that we do revolves around asking questions around what happens when the physical environment changes because of a number of forcings that have to do with global change, land use, erosion, fire, and similar processes. How do they drive change in the mechanisms of soil organic matter stabilization that has consequent implications for climate, soil health, and related topics? And we try to do all of it with the goal of pursuing inclusive excellence in everything that we do. And then, kind of just to give you a brief outline of where we're heading, we'll talk a little bit about the science of soil and soil health and biogeochemistry, cover the topic of soil degradation, which I think is extremely important in this context, especially, and what can be gained by restoring soils and restoring soil health and preventing further degradation. Okay. So, if you've never thought of it in this way, soil is actually the foundation for so many of the ecosystem services that life depends on. In many ways, soil represents the difference between life and lifelessness on planet Earth. Part of this has to do with food, a topic that's very close to what you're talking about right now. Soil is responsible for growing a lot of the food that we depend on. And we're going to get to this in a minute, but before, I thought it would be useful to just maybe start with an introduction kind of poll question to get us thinking about how much soil in particular in agricultural contexts might be degraded due to human activity right now. If you're very familiar or a little familiar with, this topic at all, would love to hear from you about how serious do you think is the global degradation of soils, in particular in agricultural context?
So I'm working on running that right now for students, and it should be good to go. So our students guessing A, 10%, B, 25%, C, 40%, D, 55%, or E, more than 70. And once we hit usually around close to 200 responses, we'll know most students have submitted their answers.
Apologies for community members. I launched the wrong poll, launching the correct one at this moment. Sorry about that.
First, did stats nerds, we have a nice normal curve happening on the student side with most guessing about 40%. Also, that poll question mix-up was my fault because I moved them around based on the talk, so apologies there, and forgot to change them in Zoom. We are good on the student side of things, so we have 42% of students guessing C, and then sort of a nice little U-curve distribution. So take it away.
So, in fact, the answer that majority got is correct. About 40% of soils. Oh, it looks like it switched a little bit afterwards. Uh, so about 40% of world soils are considered degraded. And that's about, kind of a little over a third of all of the agricultural soils have experienced some form of degradation due to a variety of human-induced pressures, as we're going to see in a minute. We're going to talk more about that. Okay. So why is this so important? This is so important, especially in this context of food, because soil is really the foundation of the global agri-food system that we all depend on, right? It provides humanity with somewhere between 95 and 99%, depending on how you factor in seafood and other food sources. Soil provides, at least 95% of all the food that humanity depends on. And it does so by directly providing the calorie that we need from 78% of it from crops that grow in soil, and 20% of the calorie being derived from other terrestrial food sources that depend on soil indirectly, like animals that feed on the plants that grow in soil, right? So what that has meant is that as the population of humans in the planet increased, the rate at which we are transforming natural and semi-natural landscapes to kind of create areas for grazing, croplands, cultivated agriculture, and everything else that ag systems need continues to increase, right? And then the other piece of this that's really important is the fact that the way we actually understand how plants are able to photosynthesize and provide all the food sources, the green plants that can photosynthesize and create all the food sources that the rest of life depends on this planet, really depends intricately on nutrients that are provided from soil. So what I mean here is that plants, to complete their physiological cycles, they need 17 essential nutrients. I know a lot of times when we talk about photosynthesis, we're so used to reducing that equation to CO2 plus water in the presence of sunlight leads to the production of sugars, right? But that's a very simplified form of how photosynthesis actually happens. That process would not unfold that way unless plants have access to 17 essential nutrients. And we call them essential because these are the elements in the periodic table that plants cannot complete their physiological cycles without. And all 17 of them are essential. And it's not just that they're essential, they're also only available to plants in certain forms. So this table, which is a bit busy, but is what you see in parentheses for each of these elements is the forms that plants are actually able to use. So that what we call the plant available forms. So what soil does is it provides these nutrients partly from weathering of parent material as soil develops, partly because of dissolution, diffusion, movement with water, mass flow processes that bring these nutrients in the forms that plants can use them and then make them available for roots so that the roots can grow, kind of and intercept the plant essential nutrients in their path of growth, take them up and complete the support all the physiological functions that plants are able to do and can do. So without these 17 essential nutrients, there is no plant growth. And 13 out of those 17 plant essential nutrients, plants can only get them from soil, right? Here I'm excluding carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, right? That technically they get from the atmosphere. But the others, as you can imagine, have to be modified. Even nitrogen, which is tons of it available in the atmosphere, plants can't use it unless it's modified in soil, right? In partnership with soil microbes. So this is what we're talking about. So critical for plant nutrition that soil is able to provide this function. Okay. And then the other piece that's really important is this idea that each one of those 17 nutrients, one, they need to be made available in soil in the right form, like I discussed earlier, in inorganic forms. And all of them are essential for soil to remain fertile, right? To be able to support plant productivity. And as plants grow, every time they're taking out nutrients, right? So at some point, when plants complete their physiological cycles, they grow, they die, and the residue has to return back to soil so that those nutrients get replenished. And of course, different plants have different variability in terms of how much of different nutrients that they need. But one nutrient cannot substitute for the other. So we recognize this really important concept in soil science and plant nutrition called the Liebig's law of the minimum is what it's typically referred to as, because it was this German chemist Justus von Liebig in the 1800s that made this idea popular, which basically states that if one growth factor, i.e., plant essential nutrient, is deficient in soil, one of those 17, right? Plant growth will be limited, even if all the other factors that plant needs, all the nutrients, all the water, all the sunlight plants need, even if all of that is available in educate forms, any single one of these nutrients, if it's available below the amount that's needed by plants, that will limit plant growth. And it's represented in this barrel kind of cartoon just to highlight that, right? In the first figure in A, phosphorus is the lowest compared to how much it's needed. So phosphorus would be the plant limiting nutrients. But if we actually were to supplement with fertilizer with phosphorus, maybe now it's not phosphorus, but rather it's nitrogen. We might reach the limit for nitrogen, right? So the plant growth will be commensurate to how much nitrogen is available. So whichever nutrient is available in the least quantity relative to how much plants need it, that ends up being the limiting variable. And remember, all of this is controlled by soil processes and how we manage them. So this is really important. And then to kind of elaborate a little bit about this whole connection of soil and food, I wanted to tell you about in particular one type of soil. But before I do, I thought for folks as introduction, it'd be useful to highlight that I'm going to be talking about this one type of soil called mollisol, but it's one of 12 soil orders that we recognize in the US classification system. Soil taxonomy is just like any biological taxonomy. It identifies soils based on a range of variables. In this case, soils in the US classification system, soils are classified based on what we call state factors of soil formation, the 5 variables listed at the bottom left of your screen: climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. And a combination of these variables gives rise to 12 distinct soil orders, the broader classification groups of soils that we recognize. In the US classification system, these are the names. They're slightly different in other classification systems. But I'm highlighting this because I just want you to remember this one soil order of the 12 mollisol that we're going to talk about in a minute. But soils can be different, right? Say if you are in a circumpolar north environment that it has a permanently frozen ground under it, you're talking about gelisols. If you're in a very new soil that is created in a floodplain, for example, from laterally moved soil, you're probably talking about an entisol and inceptisol, which are very young soils that have advanced more. In a wetland mangrove type of environment, you're talking about a histosol that's rich in organic matter, or in a desert, it's an aridisol, right? It's defined by all these variables like I'm talking about. But we're going to shelf this and move on to just talk about mollisol. Because mollisol is this really interesting soil, in my opinion, because it is the most fertile, the most productive soil order that we recognize. And the reason why this order is very, very fertile compared to every other soil order is because it is a soil that develops in prairie environments. So in areas that have tall grass prairie, roots that have extensive grasses that have extensive rooting systems, which are well known for providing a lot of carbon to soil. And so the soils are identified by having this really thick, very dark brown surface horizon that we call a molic epipedon, which highlights that there is a large concentration of organic matter derived from the turnover of the roots, the exudates that the roots release, and all that organic matter roots keep pumping into soil, basically speaking. And as a result, the soil has a lot of nutrients. Remember, all the nutrients that plants took up when they grew, right? It's in their biomass. So if the organic matter is returned to soil and the soil is rich in organic matter, it means it still has a lot of that nutrient. So as the as the residue decomposes, the organic matter releases nutrients that plants need to grow. So this soil is incredibly productive and incredible, and in many ways defines and underpins actually global food production, in particular for grains. And this is notable, for example, when you realize that certain parts of the world are well endowed with a lot of this mollisol. Other parts of the world, not so much. In this map of the soil orders, like the same 12 orders that I talked about, mollisols are identified by the bright green color, and their close cousin alpha sols are also identified by green. These again are the most fertile soils that we're talking about, right? And the countries that have so much of this green control world grain production in incredible ways. Think, for example, Canada, right? Think the US, which relatively, across the world, only 7% of soils are actually mollisols. But in the US, 21% of soils are mollisols, even more alpha sols. Hence, why the soils in the US are incredibly productive and have excess of this capacity to grow grains. Even more so, you can go to Ukraine, for example. Ukraine has 67% of their soils defined in this category. And some of you might remember that when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, there was a lot of freak out around the world about wheat production, right? This one small country in the world and its ability to support wheat production for a big chunk of the continent of Africa and many parts of the world was in jeopardy because Ukraine and its ability to continue to provide grains got compromised. And all of that is because Ukraine is so rich in these soils. In the US classification system, remember I told you it's called mollisol. In the World Resource-Based International System, these same soils are called chernozomes. So soils really, in many ways, dictate who can have food, who can have excess food, who can have adequate food, and who's going to struggle in the long term with not having these very fertile soils that you could easily grow with. Okay, so I'm trying to move on through the next slide sets because I just in the interest of time, I took a little bit of time for food. But soils are also critical for cycling of our nutrients because so much of our waste, organic waste, whether it's from our homes, from municipalities and everywhere, you and I throw it into hopefully the compost or even landfill. And we don't stop and think about it because that nutrient got cycled in landfills largely by microorganisms in soil. And it gets recycled. The nutrients that are locked in the organic waste also move on, if you will, to the next generation. Soil is also home to more living things and more diversity of living things than anywhere else in the Earth system that we know of. What am I talking about here? Soil is actually home to two-thirds of all the species that we know of. Two-thirds, right? A gram of healthy soil, whether it's topsoil from a forest or undisturbed grassland, can have up to 1 billion individual living things in it. 1 billion individual living things is impressive, but what is even more impressive is that they can be from up to 10,000 different species. And these species have more genetic variation than anything we can think of in the animal world, for example. So incredible amount of life and diversity. What does that mean? This means soils and the microbes in soil have incredible potential to control soil fertility, i.e. plant nutrition, because they regulate the rate at which residue breaks down and the nutrients get released for next generation of living things. They regulate how fast and to what extent nitrogen from the atmosphere gets fixed and becomes available in plant available forms in soil as ammonium or nitrate. It dissolves and solubilizes rock-derived nutrients like phosphorus, potassium, and others in forms that are, again, available to plants. It allows plants to expand access to the surface area of soil that they can access for water and nutrients by forming a mycorrhizal association between fungi and plant roots that allows them to trade water and nutrients for carbon from the roots. It stabilizes even soil physically by allowing formation of aggregates, regulating water infiltration and retention, and making it easier for roots to penetrate and explore soil, and even regulate soil acidity and alkalinity through pH management as a result of organic acids that microbes facilitate to releasing and contributes to availability of plant essential nutrients. So many of the fundamental processes in soil that regulate food production is thanks to microbes that are in soil. That's not even enough, right? That's the soil, the food aspect of it. But microbes also do even more than that. They actually regulate how much we are able to even maintain our health in many ways. You can think about it that way. Nearly all of the human antibiotics that we depend on are derived from soil organisms. I'll give you the example of streptomycin. Streptomycin is the antibiotic that is used to treat tuberculosis, TB, and like 70 other bacterial infectious diseases. This actually antibiotic is synthesized by a group of bacteria called actinomycetes, a specific group, Streptomyces gracias, that synthesize this compound. And the legend goes that actually this was discovered because a group of a soil microbial ecologists at Rutgers University in the 20s and 30s were trying, like many people around the world at the time, to figure out why and what they could do about TB and controlling these infections, which was killing millions of people at the time, right? And the legend goes that as they were having their lab group meetings, somebody asked, why is it that when people get infected by TB, they can share the infection to one another very, very easily. But as soon as the people die and we bury their bodies in the soil, that infection stops. So what's going on in soil that actually stops this infection? And the minds of the microbial ecologists, as you can imagine at the time, went, huh, microbes, they have a solution here. We need to figure out a way to tap into what are the microbes doing to get rid of the pathogens. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out, who of the microbes are generating the compounds that are lethal to these pathogens. And they did it eventually. It took them a while, but they did it. And the lab of the group of people that worked on this in Rutgers University is the lab of Saul Waxman, who ended up actually a soil biochemist and microbial ecologist, ended up winning the 1952 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for his discovery of streptomycin. So not just food, but even literally our health has a lot to do with soil, right? So many of the ways we do this. We go even further. Water is a really important variable. So I live in the Central Valley of California. The water that my community uses is largely derived from snowpacks in the Sierra Nevada. And the water makes its way down to us by flowing in the subsurface through soil, but also getting filtered along the way. So we get clean, adequate water thanks to soil. Of course, all of us, wherever we are right now, are sitting in structures that are built on soil using resources from soil. So it's in a major engineering medium too. And the last bit I wanted to talk about was my area of research and how soils regulate climate. And this largely has to do with the fact that as plants photosynthesize, they take out CO2 from the atmosphere, greenhouse gas, use it to build their biomass, and upon their death, that biomass and the carbon enters the soil. So that obviously contributes to building soil carbon, but the entire amount of carbon that's photosynthesized does not constitute soil carbon. Actually, in reality, most of that carbon is decomposed very quickly by the activity of soil microorganisms because decomposition is critical for the release of all those nutrients that are tied in the biomass. Remember, the biomass, the plants took up nutrients when they were growing, so they took out all that nutrients and it's tied up in their biomass. So the only way that biomass is going to be released and made available for the next generation of living things is if that residue decomposes. And so through decomposition, that happens. But over time, if a small amount of that carbon that came in through photosynthesis is stashed away in soil, into what I call the soil carbon bank, then it actually contributes to building soil carbon bank. And I want to make this, kind of a analogy of a bank because ultimately we want both photosynthesis and decomposition to proceed. But what we're aiming for is a little bit more photosynthesis than decomposition in terms of the carbon balance, because that would allow the soil carbon bank to continue to build or at least break even, but not keep drawing from the soil carbon bank, right? So we recognize that both of these processes are important, but the balance of which is what dictates how much carbon is in soil. And this is very, very important from a climate perspective I'm going to talk about. But I want to start by telling you that, this is actually also part of the reason why soil is a phenomenally exciting thing to study, even just from the fundamental chemistry and biochemistry perspectives, because soil is the most complex biomaterial that we know of anywhere in the Earth system. And so much of that complexity has to do with the organic matter, the remains of these residues that we're talking about, which is made out of a variety of different types of organic matter, right? From the different types of living things that live in soil, and how they're decomposing in the environment. And typically, organic matter is only about 5% or so of soil mass. But that 5% or so, typically even a lot less than that, is so critical for maintaining the biological processes in soil that feed life, the physical processes that stabilize soil and regulate water, gas flow, as well as the chemical reactivity that regulates soil plant nutrition. Okay, and then there's a second question just to ask you all how much carbon you think soil actually, how much carbon the soil holds compared to, say, what's in the atmosphere or living plants as a reference, if you were just to compare it.
So we have student results coming in from iClicker, and then the community members who are joining us, their results come in through the Zoom polling feature. So we'll have sort of different results through these two polling mechanisms. We can see how they differ. So we're seeing normal curves again, this time on both sides. Community members are pretty sure about it being about twice as much, whereas students, most of them are saying the same thing, but it looks like a good amount are also thinking roughly half.
Okay,
So we'll give, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna show the answer, but I can wait.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So yeah, most of you got it. It's about twice as much, twice about as much carbon in soil than there is in the atmosphere. In fact, this is something that's covered in my 2019 TED Talk that I would reference later if you want it, if you haven't checked it out and you would like to. Okay. So for reference, this is why there's so much carbon in soil, right? Wherever you go in different types of biomes, there's a lot more carbon, with the exception of a few biomes. Most ecosystems have way more carbon in soil than they do in vegetation. This is just how it plays out because over long periods of time, that small amount that got stored in the soil carbon bank added up throughout history, right? And and this is even important because soil doesn't just store carbon, it actually also regulates how fast it cycles. Because if the carbon makes it into soil, it cycles slower. So think about, for example, a residue that, in the fall that falls on the surface of your soil, that will decompose within a few months. But if that carbon actually makes it in soil, it will persist for a long period of time. And part of this is because it forms association with soil minerals. That's what is represented in this cartoon with the dots representing the carbon, because carbon can find itself inside aggregates where it's hard for microbes to access to decompose, or it can form chemical bonds with the surfaces of reactive minerals, which also makes it hard for plants to access. So we could take this analogy of bank, like I talked about earlier, even a bit further, and think about how soil carbon can be more like, distributed as income that you might have in your checking account or your saving account. Think about this for a second, right? At the beginning of the month, we all feel super rich. Our salaries hit the bank account, that we all have a lot of money, right? But that's before we pay for life, rent, car, food, water, whatever it is that you pay for, right? So that's more like a checking account. There's to be a lot of carbon entering the soil, a residue, but that residue has to decompose to feed the biota, to provide all those services like we talked about. Decomposition is essential, right? So that's going to be lost in your checking account. But the carbon that still finds its way into these specific associations, it's more like carbon in your saving account. Even if it is a small proportion of the carbon that enters the soil every year, it's the pool that cycles way slower. And that's what contributes to building the soil carbon wealth eventually. Okay. And then, just to put this in perspective, when you think about the global emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere, there's about 11 petagrams or billion metric tons of carbon released to the atmosphere every year. And about 13% of it is because of land use change and how we treat land, the rest being fossil fuel burning. But even if you consider the entire 11 petagrams of it, at the end of the day, if you think about how much of the consequence we are actually paying right now, the consequence that we're paying is roughly basically represented by about half of the carbon that remains into the atmosphere. Something funky happened when my slides, the labels got switched. They were supposed to be on the opposite sides because half of it is what remains in the atmosphere, and the other half split between land and ocean is what's actually sequestered. So all that excess CO2 we're releasing into the atmosphere, even when you consider fossil fuel burning, right now we're only paying the consequence of half of it because the other half is being taken up by natural environments through this sequestration, including a quarter of it by land and a quarter of it by the ocean. I think it's the pie chart that got flipped we're gonna leave it for now. But anyway, okay. Uh, so soil provides incredible benefits to us for this carbon sequestration, but right now, soil degradation is a major threat globally that's threatening all sorts of processes, including carbon sequestration. We published this paper about a decade ago to highlight the gravity of the soil degradation problem globally, that our growing demand for food, feed, and fiber is causing soils to degrade across the world through a variety of reasons and different severities. And the consequence of that, what you see here in colors represented by orange and red, is that soils stand to lose a lot of carbon in the next, by the end of the century. And in fact, up to this point, if we calculated how much carbon that was in soil that has been lost until this point, a study from 2017 estimated that 120 billion metric tons of carbon. Remember, we release about 11 billion metric tons every year. 120 billion metric tons of carbon that was in the top 2% of soil was lost because of human actions, lost from soil, released to the atmosphere. So this is a major, major problem globally. And this is also coupled with the fact that we are exceeding planetary boundaries across multiple arenas. We are increasing the irreversible damage of a number of critical services and components of the Earth system, which basically in combination means that not only are we degrading soils because of human actions, but now we also have to consider the fact that in this context of soil health and land degradation, climate change is becoming a threat multiplier. It's making the problem of soil degradation even harder to deal with, even more significant for the communities that suffer the consequence. I know we don't have a lot of times, but we can talk about this later if folks are interested. But it's all not dire, right? The future we choose is really 100% up to us. It's up to us because you could think about, where we're trying to go and what we could do about it. This is a data, for example, of the atmospheric concentration of CO2 throughout the last 100 million years in Earth history. The colors match with the different past climates. Basically, what it's showing is that the areas, the times that are represented by red are temperatures, very high temperatures that match with very high CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere that the world hasn't seen in more than tens of millions of years before present. The orange is fairly high, but not as extremely high CO2 concentrations and temperatures like the world hasn't seen in at least millions of years. Where we are right now this is until 1950, and where we are right now is looking like we're trying to escape from that blue area, which is instead of the modern environment where depending on the path we choose, we can end up in any one of these scenarios, right? If we continue as business as usual in what we're doing right now with all our production systems and ecosystem destruction and fossil fuel emissions, plus the growing human population, there is a scenario where we can end up at a pretty high CO2 emission conditions, unlike anything the world has seen in the last 100 million years. Or we can get our act together, reduce emissions, and end up with this middle of the road scenario that still is high, though. It's unlike anything the world has seen in millions of years, right? What we really have to do, if we're really going to bend this curve, the CO2 curve, towards sustainability, is first and foremost implement all the things we could do to reduce emissions, plus adopt climate smart ecosystem management practices that would remove more CO2 that's in the atmosphere right now and have it stored on land in plant and soil. And this is a non-negotiable that we have to do if we want to limit the increase in atmospheric temperature to 2 degrees or something in that area. And thankfully, we know there are a lot of things we could do. There's a lot of management practices that we can implement in forests, for example, that could be responsible for carbon dioxide removal to the tune of 12 petagrams, 12 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent that could be released from the atmosphere and stored on land. Similarly, even in working lands, in ag and agriculture and grasslands, there could be quite a significant sequestration and wetlands. And there's a lot of detail in some of these numbers, but this figure is something that I really like. And if you're interested, I encourage you to take a minute with it. But what basically that's showing you is the global potential of soil carbon sequestration. In particular, on the x-axis, what you're seeing is the average rate of carbon dioxide removal or greenhouse gas reduction that could be achieved through a variety of practices that we know we can implement. And then on the y-axis is the area of practical adoption, right? So, for example, restoring mangroves and wetlands has the highest, the fastest rate of carbon sequestration that we know of. Very, very high, orders of magnitude higher than most other practices. But the reality is the climate envelope where wetlands and mangroves can thrive is limited around the world, right? So it's relatively limited, but still, because of the fast rate, you can achieve on the order of about 1.3 petagrams of CO2 equivalent sequestration. On the other hand, there are all of these practices, biochar, enhanced root phenotypes, grazing management, cropland management, that we can implement across large areas around the world. So even though their greenhouse gas reducing potential is low, they could still contribute to equivalent, if not more, CO2 removal from the atmosphere every year. And in fact, there's an estimate from a group in France that have been used by a lot of people around the world that suggests that if we can only increase the percent carbon stored in soil by 0.4% or 4 per mil annually, we can take out about a third of the atmospheric CO2 that we need to remove from the atmosphere just with these nature-based solutions. To give you one example, for example, if we just enhance the root phenotypes of plants, if we were to adopt more and more of those deep-rooted plants, the kind that are responsible for building up the mollisols that I talked about earlier, if we could do that at scale, and do it through a combination of whether it's genetic modification, breeding, adoption of natural varieties of grasses that have extensive rooting systems, whatever the solution might be, that alone can remove on the order of about 1 petagrams of CO2 equivalent per year while contributing to building soil health, right? So there's many, many things we can do. And my belief in this is that there's no shortage of solutions that we know we could do. We need political will and willingness to pay for these practices because soil can be part of a very powerful part of the solution for climate change mitigation. But we have to remember that we can't just be zoomed in on the carbon because improving soil health, reducing soil degradation is so, so, so critical for so many of the things we want to accomplish as humanity. So if we can think about, a systems perspective and think about the many interlocking variables that are key for life processes on land, and if we stop treating our soil like dirt, then we can actually improve soil health and mitigate against climate change. And I'm leaving this one also on the slide so that you all can see a work that we did a few years ago to just highlight how soil health and healthy soils are so critical for, of course, food security, but overall, even for planetary survivability. There is no healthy people without healthy soils, and there's no healthy planet without healthy people and healthy soils. And we use the framework of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals in this, where we demonstrated that for 13 out of the 17 sustainability development goals, improving soil health, and in particular, building soil carbon, improving carbon stored in soil is foundational because it contributes in many, many different ways to achieving of those goals. I know this is a little detail, so we're not going into detail, but I encourage you to check it out. I want to close by basically reminding you, hopefully, what we talked about, and that soil represents the difference between life and lifelessness on this planet. It's a fascinating and important world. It also provides humanity with more than 95% of our food needs. But rapid population growth plus the rapid land conversion for agriculture that it spurred has caused intensification in the agricultural system that is responsible for so much of the soil degradation right now. And that is causing a decrease in the soil's health and its long-term ability to provide us even with the food, feed, fiber, and other needs that we need from soil. So if we care about food, We have to care about soil. And I personally think this is an incredibly urgent global crisis that we have to address together. And there's a last question, which is more of a memory test at this point, since I told you the answer. Um, if you can remember a single teaspoon of healthy soil, how many organisms do you think it contains?
All right, I'm getting this up and running for students.
Taylor, poll question 3 for Zoom.
Yep, that one should be correct. There we go. All right. We have similar distribution from community members and students. Most everyone is saying D, billions, with millions as a close second.
Yep, we said millions to billions, so they're all correct, right?
Right.
Yeah. So as you remembered, we said millions to billions, more like closer to billions, actually, individual species. And all of that is so critical for so many of the essential processes, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, and even just the maintenance of life and fertility of the soil ecosystem. With that, this is it for my presentation. But if anything I said caught your attention, I encourage you all to check out, in particular, the two TED Talks that are linked here that I delivered at the main stage in 2019 and 2023. Another one that I'm super proud of is this cartoon. It's a 4-page cartoon derived from my 2019 TED Talk, and it's freely available through either my website or the TED.com website that anybody can download, use it for K to 12 teaching, whatever else, or engagement with in the community about why does soil even matter from a context of climate change. So I hope that you find that interesting. And I just want to acknowledge that I love soil. I love talking about soil, but a lot of the work that we do and the publications that you saw are results of a long-term collaboration with many people and funding from many generous sources that we've received over the years. So um, I will share all the credit for the work with them, but if there are any blames and criticism of the work, I will fully take that. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Well, Taylor's coming back on. We will actually share in our link in our newsletter that goes out this Friday to about 3,500 people all over the place. We'll share the links to both your TED Talks and to your lab and to that graphic. Those are great. We're excited to share some of these images that you shared with us as well, and we'll credit them appropriately. Back to you, Taylor.
We are going to pass things on to Julius now and to you, Amanda, to sort of walk us through some of the goings on, both on and off campus this week.
Q&A first, Taylor.
Oh, we're missing. Okay, my apologies. We switch our roles every week, and I missed that. So let's go ahead with Q&A. We have 11 questions here from the Zoom feature. So let's go ahead and get started with this first question. And this question sort of popped up in my mind as well as we were talking about, it's not too late in that sort of notion. So what happens so this is the way this question is phrased. What happens when factory farms take over the US food system in relation to our soil? What about these sort of kind of power dynamics, and who's most accountable and what do we do with that?
Yep, this is a major issue, right? Because the intensification of agriculture, in particular in industrialized ag systems, is a big part of the problem for soil degradation because of things like over tillage more than the land can handle in terms of its stability, excess application of agricultural chemicals, monocultures, all of these kind of variables that are set to maximize profit, but decline soil health incredibly fast and degrade soil incredibly fast. This is part of the problem. Of course, if and when soil is degraded, we all pay the benefit for it. We all pay the price for it, not benefit. We all pay the price for soil degradation, even though, of course, we don't share in the benefit of what industry farms create. And so this is a very interesting and challenging aspect of land degradation, and why I think it's actually critical to use like a political ecology lens, because there's a huge political economics kind of dynamics at play here of who has the power, who benefits, and who suffers the consequence of the degraded environment, right?
Absolutely. From an anonymous attendee, does the current farm bill contain much in the way of improving soil health? And what would help?
So interestingly, the farm bills have had in the last several years, especially several, I should even say almost 2 decades at this point, they've had provisions for improving soil health. They've had provisions for reducing erosion and soil degradation. They've even have provisions for increasing carbon storage in soil and nature-based climate change solutions that include the kind of practices that I talked about. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, nature-based climate change solution and addressing soil degradation tends to be an issue that has bipartisan support in Congress, because it affects growers, right? Constituents of people, representatives on both sides of the aisle. And that when food prices increase, or when environment degrades, and they can't produce as much as they can anymore, growers, of course, constituents on all sides get affected. So this had historically received bipartisan support. And things are, of course, a little different this year than they've been historically. So a lot remains up in the air about how we may, how the things that gained so much momentum in the last few years may or may not continue in the next few years. I think that remains to be seen, but the hope is that this issue continues to receive the bipartisan support that it always had, because it affects us all, regardless of our political affiliations.
Yeah, sometimes we can see food as this sort of uniting factor across immense political divides. So
Yeah,
here's hoping soil can continue doing that.
I hope so.
So another anonymous attendee, tying back to Joni Mitchell's song about how they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Do you happen to know what percentage of critically important soils for food production are being lost to housing and commercial development? Or do you have any sort of understanding of how that plays in?
That one's really hard, because the soils that are cultivated and lost from agriculture, the large practice of it, and degraded, they're not necessarily in urban environments, right? Where most of the people live. Um, I think when you look at the maps, if you look at the area of soil degradation that you see, a big chunk of the world, soil degradation is largely driven by tillage practices, unsustainable tillage practices, and soil erosion. That is the biggest driver by far of all soil degradation globally in all sorts of environments around the world. But of course, locally in some places, housing and development could also create a big challenge. But that's a very unique to specific localities kind of problem, not necessarily the biggest driver globally of soil degradation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sounds like that could be a dissertation project right there. Okay. Gabriel asks, are there any self-healing capacities with soil? For example, leaving the land alone and allowing it to do its own thing?
Yes, fallowing, which is basically leaving land alone, as long as there's a ground cover to make sure that it's not degraded by excessive rain, excessive radiation, and things like that. As long as there's an organic matter plant cover to it, is one of the most important things we can actually do to give soil chance to heal itself, to recover from extractive practices that have to do with agriculture. So it's actually fallowing is a major soil health practice. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's see. Julie, a guest with us tonight, has read that recently soils in some countries have stopped sequestering carbon. Have you heard this? Do you know anything about this? Is this true?
Yeah, so we're finding out that the extent of degradation in soils is becoming so high. It's not just a few countries here and there, but the rate at which soils have been taking out excess atmospheric CO2 seems to have plateaued, and it maybe even looks like it might decline. Remember, I said we're only paying the consequence for 50% of the pollution we release into the atmosphere, because half of that is being taken care of by land. But that number is not clear. It will stay forever at 50% because of the degradation of soil, because of the degradation of the oceans that we are causing, limiting their ability to actually continue to take up excess atmospheric CO2. So yeah, this is a very challenging global issue that a lot of people are looking into, which is directly related to degradation of soil and the way we're messing with ecosystem health and functioning.
Thank you. Two guests have asked this same question. How can we amend soil in our own backyards? What can we do at home to start building up the soil?
A lot of things, in particular, of course, limit how much we disturb the soil, limit the excess application of agricultural chemicals, and whenever we can, add residue. Leave the residue alone in the soil, right? I know a lot of people like this very clean, green front yard, that where all the excess leaves that fall on the top of the soil are removed and taken away by the trash, whatever. But the easy thing we could do is just leave it alone. Leave those residues to decompose on the surface of the soil. Leave them to protect the surface of the soil. Don't apply too much water. Don't apply too much chemicals, and then let the ground support as much vegetation as it possibly can in a sustainable manner. And that would go a long way.
That's great. That reminds me of a book called Lawn People, and it's about sort of the political ecology of protecting these perfect grass lawns in suburban neighborhoods. And in Michigan, it's kind of in Ann Arbor, it's kind of a radical act of protest to let those leaves stay on that perfect lawn. Let's see, we got a great question from Koki here. What are the main challenges in promoting nature-based solutions? I'd like to know beyond the fact that the current administration has reduced the budget available for this sector.
I think a big part of this to me is actually not necessarily is the budget for research being cut. It's as a society, how much all of us are willing to pay, how much we're willing to actually pay for the products that we demand from land, from growers, right? Because climate smart soil management practices are time intensive, resource intensive. If growers are going to implement them, it's going to take a lot of their time. It's going to take a lot of their energy and resources. So the question is, a question is, how can we make sure that we make it worthwhile for the growers to be able to do right by the soil, which largely is tied to our ability to pay for those services at a reasonable price so that they can be compensated at a reasonable rate for for not just growing the food and feed we need, but also for doing right by soil, right? So much of this is actually on the economic side more than the government not necessarily kind of providing funding for research, even though obviously that has huge implications for how we understand the world. And so I think to me, that's where it becomes incredibly important for us to be engaged.
Thank you for that. We're gonna wrap up Q&A in about 5 minutes. We can probably get maybe 2 more questions in. Let's see here. We still have several. Let's go with one more sort of at-home type of question.
Sure.
Do you recommend digging organic matter into soil, turning soil for folks who are trying to build soil?
So that depends on the type of soil. So reduced tillage or no-till, not mixing, not turning soil, may work in some types of soils. But if you're trying to grow plants, if you're trying to grow crops or grains or whatever it is in soil, if your soil is clayey, you can barely do it, maybe with minimum tillage for a few years without actually turning the soil, because it becomes hard, it becomes really compact and heavy, and plant roots can't penetrate that. So you can't actually do, kind of optimal level of plant, kind of crop production or whatever it is, unless the soil is turned and loosened. This is why farmers spend a lot of time tilling soil, not necessarily because they recognize tillage destroys soil's physical stability. But there are some soils where if you don't do that, you're just not going to be able to grow much in it. So as useful as a practice like reduced tillage or no tillage is, it's not a universally applicable technique for all the time. You might be able to do it for short periods of time, and you might be able to intervene with less destructive approaches and then start over for a little bit of time again. But it's not a universal practice that you can implement everywhere. I think in the 50s and 60s, there was a tendency to kind of tell folks that, growers in particular, you all have to do no-till. Tillage is the most destructive practice, yes, but the reality is it's really hard to do agriculture in heavy clayey soils if you don't do that.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And let's finish with a question that's sort of place-based, where you are based. Can you tell us a little bit more about the state of soil health in the Central Valley and any sort of important factors?
Not great. So anybody who knows anything about the Central Valley, you probably know that this is the food basket of the country. So much of the food, especially fruits, vegetables, that the US depends on grow in right here. In fact, Merced County, where I'm based, grows over 90% of all the almonds and a variety of other nuts for the world, not just the country, for the world. So it's a huge agricultural area. And the reason why it's a huge agricultural area is because the soils around here historically have been very fertile. These are soils that were historically wetland soils, a lot of organic matter, especially after the Dust Bowl, when farmers from the southern part of the US moved into the Central Valley in California, because they couldn't cultivate their land in Alabama and Mississippi and other places at the time. When they moved here, there was a large-scale effort to drain the wetlands and cultivate the soil, because wetland soils have a lot of residue, a lot of organic matter, a lot of nutrients, very fertile, very, very useful for agriculture. And it's been that way for that time. But what we've got going right now, though, is after these decades of extractive, really intensive agricultural practices, the soils are highly degraded, so degraded to the point where that the land surface has subsided. That's how much organic matter has been lost. The land surface itself has reduced significantly, in some places by a couple of meters. Because it's coupled by not just the decomposition of the residue, but also with groundwater extraction that is also causing the ground surface to lower. So there's a significant amount of degradation up and down the valley right now. I have a colleague who refers to agriculture in the Central Valley right now as something close to aquaculture. We've got the basin. We pump it with a lot of agriculture, with a lot of irrigation and agricultural chemicals. And then, of course, you grow whatever you want. But it's not the healthy soils that the system historically had depended on. That's not where we are right now. Soils have degraded quite significantly, and it's a different system now than what it was when so many farmers moved in here after the Dust Bowl.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for contributing such valuable perspective to our class. We've really kind of transcended so many different topics in food systems, and to have something as literally and metaphorically fundamental as soil come into the conversation, I think is really amazing for students and community members. So thank you so much, Dr. Berhe. We will share out TED Talks and sort of ways to get in touch if students want to connect with you further. And in the meantime, we will move into some of these on and off campus food systems events.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you again so much for that deep dive. Really appreciate getting to uh, get our hands in the soil a little bit metaphorically tonight. Um, some of the upcoming things happening here on campus. This is open for anybody. Continuing in the series, Drinking the Revolution. The next event is on March 26th at Hatcher Gallery from 4 to 5:30 p.m., where you can come and learn and have a conversation around taverns and the post-revolutionary Republican experiment. This next one is for students. We've talked a lot about throughout the semester some of these opportunities that come out of dining and other parts of the food movement that are led and sustained by our students here on campus. One of those being the bite-sized event, and that will be happening on Thursday, March 26th at Blue Llama Jazz Club from 6 to 8 p.m. So going to that, I think it's open to anybody. It's a food themed variety to show. And in addition, M Dining is hiring some summer interns. So you can either scan that QR code or you can type in this link in your browser if you're interested in that opportunity.
So coming up soon is registration for those of you still around in the fall as undergraduates or graduates. Students, I wanted to highlight three different new courses that we know about in food systems. One is an undergraduate course in public health, food systems around the world, a geographic perspective. Some of you may know Andy Jones, who teaches there, and that looks like a really incredible new course. And also Dr. Miranda Brown and Asian Cultures and Languages is teaching a whole class called Milk. So from the history, culture, politics, I mean everything and then some about milk, I think will be really and the dairy industry historically and currently and future wise. So take a look at that. Next up, Julius, if you could be our slide advancer. The one so this is my class, and last I didn't have this this year slide last week, but I did announce it. So I'm teaching a new class in developing for undergraduates local food policy, all about municipal level, county level, school district level. So all those local levels of government and how they interact with food. And it's a really practical course where you're going to learn about policy instruments and how you take from the issue you care about to actually making change. What are those functions? So I bring a policy background as well as a long food background. Excited for you to join that. But I wanted to say for all students, undergraduate and graduate students, that the Sustainable Food System Initiative, we hope by next Tuesday, we will have our full course guide for fall of 2026. We'll send you links, we'll put in the newsletter when it's ready. But we basically go through every unit on all of campus and gather and grab and organize all of the food courses being offered in the next term. So we're in that process right now and hope to have it by next Tuesday. We know you're starting to register soon, but that's a great way to find food classes really across all different disciplines. So take a look at that. Take a look for that next week, and in next week's newsletter, it will be out from thereafter. Next slide.
All right, next week, for class next week, we're excited to welcome with us author Alice Driver, who will be sharing about their book called The Life and Death of the American Worker. So when we have her next week, she'll be talking about, I'm just going to read this quick summary of the book in the spirit of the investigative journalism by Patrick Keefe, Matthew Desmond, and Beth McKay. Alice Driver will discuss the toxic labor practices at the largest meatpacking company in America, Tyson Foods. Driver will pull back the curtain, taking us into the secretive world of meat and poultry processing facilities. She'll share stories from workers and even the industrial recipe for chicken nuggets. So it'll be a really exciting talk next week. Hope that you will join us. Obviously, if you're students, please do join us. But hope that everyone will join us for that as well. So thanks again, everybody, for being here tonight, for being a part of this work. Thank you for the talk on soil this evening. It was really fascinating and lots of engagement in the chat and in the questions. So I know lots of people in our community really appreciated it. Otherwise, we are at the end of our course for tonight. So we're giving you all back a couple minutes of your evening, and have a wonderful night. And we'll see you next week.